Ballard. It's September 15th, 2011, and I'm here at the Claddock House of James Fraser, just south of Manchester. James, thank you very much for having us here today. Are you ready to start?
Yes, I am.
How did you end up in Manchester?
Good question. I have to rely on what others have told me. But in 1926, my parents and my aunt and uncle bought 3 lots from Pope and Talbot, waterfront lots, here in Manchester. And at the age of less than a year, I was brought on a blanket here by my parents. And this place had nothing except lots of fir trees, lots of underbrush, no electricity, no water at all, no well, and it was a really privileged place.
Where did you board the ferry?
Well, in those days, we boarded the ferry in downtown Seattle, and we came across to Manchester, and it took about...
Was it a similar place it is now at Coleman Dock, or was it over at Alki?
No, it was in pretty much the same location as now, except the building was much smaller. You know, Captain Peabody owned the Black Ball Line in those days. It was a much more simple place. But we left from right downtown Seattle, and came straight across, and took about 50 minutes, and that's less time than it takes now to get from Manchester using the ferry.
You docked in Manchester.
Yes.
Yes. And you mentioned that there was a little store there before we were talking?
Yes, there was. It was where the Pomeroy Park is now. And when we used to come, when I got a little older and could walk, one of my grandmothers, they would come and bring me and some of my cousins over, and we would always leave from downtown Seattle, cross with a ferry at about 50 minutes, and then when we got off the ferry, my grandmother would buy things like kerosene and things that we needed to have, because there was no electricity here. And in fact, we didn't have a house here until 1930. So when we came over in those early years, it was just a tent, the bonfire outside, and a campfire, and mostly we camped down below at by the water on the beach area.
Now, when you hit Manchester, what buildings do you recall being there?
Well, I can remember as a little kid, I can remember that there are Victorian houses that are still there, pretty much in the downtown area. I can remember that there were several commercial buildings, but for me, as a kid and my cousins, the big deal was the little store there, where it was right at Pomeroy Park, because you could rent rowboats there. My grandmother could buy the last minute things, but for the kids and me, there was a glass little showcase there that had a lot of penny candy and stuff in. So we would spend our allowance and usually load up with as much as we could get away with, without my grandmother telling us, no, you can't have any more. And we'd get ourselves ready then for the weekend or for the week here.
Now, we're about 1.5 miles south here of the dock now. How did you get down here?
Well, most of the time how we went, now this is going with my grandmother when we didn't have the car, we would have shopping bags. Each of us had to carry shopping bags too. And we would go then get off the ferry, go and get the things at the store, and then we would walk along on the boardwalk. And the boardwalk in those days extended all the way to Hemlock. And at Hemlock there was a little stream that came right down there, and the Manchester Inn was there. That was the only place where you could go and stay. And I have to tell you, later on, I understood that was a place where uncles came to with their nieces to spend a little time, like a weekend there.
I see.
And my grandmother would pull us by the Manchester Inn very quickly, and then we would walk a little bit further past the boardwalk, and we would see there was a trail that went up the bank, and we would walk up that trail through the bank and come out on Miracle Mile, very close to just barely Miracle Mile.
And is that where the road was?
That was the original road.
That's where you hit the road for the first time. You know,
yes.
You went to trail, and then you up the bank there, and then you hit Miracle Mile.
Exactly. And that was Miracle Mile. That was really, in the old days, before that, had been just a trail, you know, for the timber, for cutting wood. And we walked from there then and there was no Pritchard Road. It was just a plain road there. and then we got to the house from there. Once in a while we would walk along on the beach, but hardly ever, because it was very rough then, all the stone and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a beautiful place here. At the time, it was just a part of this house. That original house is the same, or?
Nothing here at all.
No.
We didn't have anything. We had just tents, and we cooked mostly down. My father did do one thing that was a great improvement. He got an old barrel, dug a hole, and then we put the barrel in that. And the water, you'd have fresh water in that, which was okay for cooking and things if you boiled it. My mother and my grandmother's made a big deal about that, but that's what we had. And we had absolutely no electricity and no well or...
and how old were you at that time?
Well, all the way from when I was about 2 or 3 up until 1930, which would have made me, when we had our first cabin here, that would have made me 4 years old, 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just a simple cabin. It was only 12 by 24 feet. It had an 8-foot wide porch across the front that was screened. We had a lot of mosquitoes in those days, and that's where we slept. And we had these big beds set out there in the screen porch, and there was also a back porch that led from the kitchen area. It was just a one-room cabin.
Just a one-room cabin.
Wood stove.
Wow. Now, did you go downtown to any restaurants or anything like that? Or
Well,
was there anything down there?
a little later on, my Uncle Bob, who had lived in various places, but had spent a lot of time here too, he had what they called the Manchester Cafe, and that was right on the end of the wharf, built over on one side. So that was about the only cafe that I can remember there. Later on, we had a post office there, and we also had Ballard Realty, which I'm sure you remember something about that with your parents. But it was pretty simple, and you brought most of the things with you that you needed. But they had things like, I can remember if my grandmother needed thread and needles or other little things, little patent medicines and things.
You remember, have any idea who ran it, or?
I wish I could remember, but I remember how he looked, the proprietor of that little general store, but I never knew his name. But we almost always bought the same kind of things there.
Okay, there was no boat. There was boat rentals, but they didn't have that railway at that time, did they?
No, they were small rowboats that you rented. You could rent it for the day, or I suppose for a half day. And in those days, it didn't cost very much, and we could rent one of those to go fishing, or to row over to Blake Island, which in those days we called Trimble Island.
Oh, okay. Do you remember the Trimble estate over there at all?
I do. I remember that very, very well. And Trimble was a lawyer and I guess an investor in timber. And he bought that island, I understand. And it's kind of a sad story. My understanding of it is that they built that mansion, big, beautiful place, rustic. They had a son who was mentally handicapped. And he was put pretty much kept on the island. They had 2 men that lived year-round there, and they would row around to guard the island so nobody could trespass. That was until the beginning of the 30s, 1930s, and that's when I would have been 6, 7, 8 years old, maybe. And then that all swept away, and maybe because of the Depression, I don't know. There is one story that Mrs. Trimble had her car at the dock. They couldn't take the car over to Trimble, so they'd leave it in Manchester. And she had her car, she'd gotten her car, and she was parked in line to get on the ferry. She was first in line, and she was in the car, and the car brake let go or something happened. Nobody really knew what happened, but that car went into the water and she drowned.
Oh, my word.
And when that happened, Mr. Trimble, I think he was done with the place and he just left everything. The Trimble estate had its furniture, had curtains, draperies, rugs, I can remember. And we would go over there to get driftwood and just play and so forth. And you could go in the mansion, walk around, windows were broken. Sad situation.
Oh, I'll be darned. And this, you remember anything about the fire? Or, go ahead and give me some more of a transition. When you were young, you were here until about what time? Until you were what age? And then you moved on?
We would come every summer, and lots of times, like in the spring, and sometimes in the wintertime. And my cousins, I've always had somebody here to play with, either friends, but mostly my own cousins. And those were pretty hard times, the Depression. And I can see that that would be a time where wouldn't be going to a resort or a hotel. You could come here, and especially after we had the cabin. We came 2 or 3 times a year, and that was all during the 30s. And my father had gone. My father was in the shipping business, and that's Ralph Carlton Fraser, and he had been sent over to Europe a couple of times because there were a lot of people concerned about war and World War again, and the shipping lines that were based in Europe, like in Norway, Sweden, even in Hamburg, and a couple of other places. They were planning, if in case there was war, they would switch their operations from Europe to USA or around here. They would switch that so that the lines would be based in Seattle, Portland, maybe Vancouver, BC, and they would be going down to South America carrying freight, and a lot of freight to Asia. And there was no thought in those days about, they didn't think what was going to happen with Japan. So those were all those things that were going on, at that time. And we had great times here, my cousins and I. When we came with our grandmothers, we had a lot more freedom than when we came with our parents, because not so much supervision. So we could have bonfires by ourselves, fix marshmallows. There was no rules about fireworks. There was no rules about where you could build a bonfire. And sometimes we'd get a log or a little boat, and we'd manage to swim across to what we called Trimble Island there, but it was really Blake Island, yes. And we'd come back. And a couple of times we were caught by our grandmothers, but it wasn't too much. They were pretty indulgent with us. We had great times here. And we loved to go down fishing, down to the dock in Manchester.
Were you catching fish right off the dock? Or?
Yes, and about the only kind of fish we could catch there was perch, because they evidently stayed around the dock. The one thing I don't remember very much about are the crabs. Now we have a lot of crabbing, but I don't remember hardly any of that. Salmon, once in a while, my uncles, my father, I'd get to go, and my father kept a 16-foot lap strap boat with a Johnson outboard motor that was maybe about 3 horsepower and probably weighed like 125 pounds. But we could go out and go trolling, and once in a while we would catch the salmon there. The one thing that was good, was reliable, were clams. We could go clamming. That was a great thing.
Clams right up front. So then eventually you grew up and moved on.
Well, what happened actually was, my father had decided that he didn't want to stay in Seattle, and so in 1942 we moved here from Seattle, and he sold the property in Seattle, and that's when it was pretty luxurious. We had electricity for the first time. We'd had a well dug about 1933. My hand, which still operates, we can use here, but that well was a great thing. But besides the well, in 1942 we got an electric pump for the water, so we had water pressure. That meant we had plumbing, and we had electricity, and we had a septic system put in, a big one actually. So then it was pretty civilized here, and the house was expanded to one bathroom and 3 bedrooms, living room, dining room, and then we had a couple of cabins here too. And we used one to keep the boat, and another one kind of a spare place. When we had the company, they could stay there and sleep there. But lots of sleeping bags and things like that, and tents also.
But I understand when you got older, you got a job and you moved to Europe.
Well, yeah, what happened in 1942, and then I volunteered, went into the Army Air Force as an aviation cadet. I was going to fly first 17s. I got to fly them a couple times, and then transferred to B 29s. And about that time, the war was over, and I was very fortunate. I got out among the first men who got out from the service right after World War II, because we'd agreed to fly, and there was a contract we had, and so they had to let us go once the war was over. And went to University of Washington for a couple of years, and then I went down. I had family by that time down in Peru because one of my father's partners had moved there, and so I went down there to be with my cousins, and I went to school there. I was married there to Barbara Twig Fraser, and we had a great time there. My first daughter was born in Lima, Peru. And then after we did all that, we came back here. Both of us finished up our education at the University of Washington, and we lived here. It was great. And in the meantime, I had built a little house, 18 by 24 feet, up above Manchester, and we had done that, so we lived there for a while too. But just during the time, for maybe a year or so, and then we moved over to Seattle and bought a house on Pasadena Place in the University District. There, and then from there, I had wanted to go back and work in Peru because I still had family there, but somehow that never could really work. I was going to go for with Pan American Airways, but somebody else always got one of those jobs who already worked at Pan American. And so that didn't look like a very big thing. So I went to work for a company called the Lindy Air Products Company, which is owned by Union Carbide, because they made a lot of airplane parts and they knew about welding. And I got into high-tech, very advanced welding. A lot of it had been developed successfully during World War II. And I promoted that in Europe, based in Geneva. And by that time we had 3 children, and had 2 more children in Geneva, and from there went to Spain, opened up an office there, general things, all the things that Union Carbide sold.
Okay, then when you retired, you came back to.
Well, I'll tell you, Bob. The thing was, when I left here, this was such a podunk place. Wasn't great, wasn't my kind of place at all. And I just thought, I speak Spanish, and I wanted to have more experience in the world, and that was great. But what happened is the years went by. Every year, we would come back here for the summers. We always wanted to be here. My children, we were moving around all the time, going to various places and traveling. But this was the one place we could come home to. So I loved it. And this place, Manchester, changed a lot as people moved in, and it got to be a much more interesting place. And finally figured out, when I was getting ready to retire, that this would be a place to come.
Okay.
So that's what we did. And retired in 1958, came back here.
Retired in 58, so you've been here full-time since then.
Yes. My mother died in 1978, and then my father died in 1980. And this property, I feel so blessed about that. I was an only child, so I inherited it.
I remember in the mid-60s, I used to take care of your dad's car with Ellery Hovgaard down there at the Manchester Mall. I remember him coming in. I can visualize the car, but I'm trying to guess. I think it was green or something.
Well, yeah, he had several. My mother he liked Chryslers, and he bought a great big Chrysler for my mother, a used one, of course. And that thing was always giving problems, and she wouldn't drive it. My father said, well, the green one, that was the Wayfarer. That was a Dodge Wayfarer, I'm sure. And a couple of my kids got to drive that.
But I liked your dad. I used to come out with real grubby hands, and I think he always said that I could pass on washing his windshield.
Well, if he let you touch the car, he must have had confidence in you. That's what I would say. Oh, gosh.
So, I am Juan Agustin Gallardo Markman. I was born in Santiago, Chile in 1937. And I am a law graduate from the university, from the Catholic University. And as in that capacity, I met James in my office in the legal department of the Ministry of Economics. And knowing him, we started to know each other, and we have been friends since then.
Since 1966.
Which happens in 1966. Then many things happened in Chile, and I went first to Belgium and then to France. And by that time, he had moved to Chicago. And then I went to Chicago, and then I was hired by a company, a French company that sold shoes, which I did quite successfully, because many good customers bought only from me, and I got good commissions. But then, one way or another, I ended up working for Tiffany and Company in Chicago also, and my customers from the shoes went to Tiffany, and there I met one of the Rockefeller women, which bought only from me, and then she invited us to her house a few times. Then he retired from his company and came here to live. I kept working in Chicago for 2 years, I think, and then I decided to come over here to live with him again. Since I have been here before twice, I like the place, I like the area, I like the vegetation, I like many things, and that's why I am still here. In the meantime, many things have happened to me. I became diabetic a few years ago, and I had a collapse in many respects, but in this place, the garden you see, it has been more or less my predicament. And I am not finished yet, but sooner or later it will be finished, I hope soon.
But it's very lucky for Claddock House that you came, and the gardens, the whole place has really benefited from your being here. That's for sure.
And the weather and the climate. And Manchester also attracts me in many respects, but not because it is beautiful, because it isn't. But it has many attractions, and I still like to go there a few times a week to get the mail, and that gives me an occasion to go around. And what impresses me enormously is that in the last few years, it has improved, in my judgment, a great deal with new buildings. And in that capacity, I hope it will continue. The attractions of Manchester is the restaurant where we go at least once a week or even more, and sometimes I go by myself, and sometimes I go with James, and sometimes with others or with more people.
Neighbors.
And actually, I like to bring more people to there. On the other hand, being in this place, having access to the ocean, to the beach, gives me a great opportunity to make improvements in this property in terms of gardening. I don't remember mentioning that I am diabetic, and the physical activity is good for me, Therefore, all the gardening is my work. Sure, I have help also,
Yes, you
but I do the designs and I do the thinking, and that gives me great pleasure as well.